I had been on the road for almost 6 hours already, making my way through the empty stretches of highway that cut through the Midwest like deep, endless scars in the earth. The road was desolate, flanked by towering pines that swayed in the biting wind. I was en route to a small town in Colorado, where I had a promising job interview lined up. My current life felt stagnant, and this new opportunity meant a fresh start, something I desperately needed. To save money, I decided to drive instead of flying. It was a long, grueling trip, and by the time the clock ticked past 1 a.m., exhaustion was creeping in like a slow poison. I had been chugging cheap gas station coffee for the last 100 miles, but it wasn't enough. My eyes burned, my thoughts drifted, and my mind began playing tricks on me. Somewhere in the quiet blackness ahead, I saw something unusual, a figure standing on the side of the highway. He was motionless, facing my direction, yet not waving or signaling for help. Just standing. I slowed slightly as I approached, and for a brief second, I got a better look at him. He wore a dark suit, though it was wrinkled and slightly disheveled. His head tilted slightly as my car passed, following my movement with an unnatural stillness. My skin prickled, and a deep, instinctual part of me told me to keep driving. I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him gone. But he was still there, standing in the same spot, his body now angled just slightly more toward the road. Watching. A shiver crawled up my spine, and I shook my head, trying to convince myself I was just overtired. Maybe he was a hitchhiker, maybe his car broke down. Either way, it wasn't my problem. Then, 15 minutes later, I saw another figure ahead. Same suit, same motionless posture. My stomach knotted as I slowed down, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Was it the same man? That was impossible. I had been driving at 70 miles per hour. No one could have gotten here on foot so quickly. Despite my better judgment, I pulled onto the shoulder and turned my head to get a better look. But the second I did, he was gone. I blinked hard, my heart pounding against my ribs. The road was empty. The space where he had stood was now just barren gravel and dead grass. I was losing it. I needed to sleep. A rest stop sign loomed ahead in the distance, and I made the decision to pull in, just for a quick nap. The lot was nearly deserted, only 2 other cars parked far apart from each other. I positioned my car near a dimly flickering street lamp, locking the doors before reclining my seat. I tried to settle in, but sleep wouldn't come. My nerves were still shot, and every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that motionless figure, his empty gaze locked onto me. I don't know how long I laid there before I heard it. A single, deliberate knock on my window. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head, pulse hammering, expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. Just my reflection in the darkened glass. Then another knock, but this time from the other side. I whipped my head around, but again, nothing. I was fully awake now, my body coiled tight with tension. I reached for the keys, ready to start the car, but something in the rearview mirror made my blood turn to ice. A figure, sitting in my back seat. His face was obscured by darkness, but the faint outline of a suit was unmistakable. I barely had time to react before the interior lights flickered, just for a fraction of a second. When they came back on, the seat was empty. I gasped, flinging the door open and stumbling out into the cold night air. I stared at my car, expecting, what? A trick of the light? My mind playing tricks on me? The lot was still empty. The other parked cars remained dark and lifeless. I couldn't stay here. I had to get back on the road. I climbed back inside, locked the doors, and floored the gas pedal, tires screeching against the pavement as I peeled out of the lot. My hands were trembling, my breath uneven. I didn't stop again for another 2 hours, not until I reached a gas station at the edge of a small, nameless town. I needed to pull myself together before I lost my mind completely. Inside, the gas station was empty except for a single cashier behind the counter, a middle-aged man with tired eyes. I grabbed a coffee and made my way to the counter. As I reached for my wallet, I noticed something in the glass reflection behind him. A figure, standing in the parking lot outside. My stomach lurched. It was him, the man in the suit. I spun around so fast that I nearly knocked over the cup of coffee. But there was nothing there. I turned back to the cashier, my voice unsteady. Did you see someone just now? Outside. The man frowned slightly and glanced over his shoulder. Nope. You all right? I forced a nod, but my heart was still racing. I paid for my coffee and left quickly, my pulse hammering in my ears. As I stepped outside, the air was deathly still. The town around me was lifeless, the distant buildings swallowed by the night. And then, just before I reached my car, I heard it again. A knock, but this time it came from inside. I froze. My fingers hovered over the door handle, my breath shallow, heart pounding so hard I swore it might stop altogether. The knock had come from inside my car. The windows were tinted, reflecting the gas station's neon lights, making it impossible to see inside. I swallowed hard, a sharp prickle running down my spine. I reached into my pocket, gripping my keys tight, my thumb brushing over the smooth metal. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had I left the door unlocked at some point? Had someone slipped inside when I was too distracted? I took a slow step back, my pulse hammering against my skull. Then, suddenly, the passenger door clicked open. It wasn't flung open, wasn't yanked violently. It just opened, slow and deliberate, like an invitation. A breath shuddered out of me as I took another step back, now standing in the dim glow of the gas station's flickering lights. I didn't dare move closer. I didn't want to see what was inside. And then, a voice. Low, measured, coming from within the car. I was waiting for you to get back. Every hair on my body stood on end. The voice was familiar. I knew that voice. But it wasn't possible. I took another step back, my body screaming at me to run, but my brain short-circuited, stuck in place as the shadow inside the car shifted. And then he stepped out. The man in the suit. Only, it was me. The same height. The same face. The same exhausted, dark-ringed eyes staring back at me with an unsettling calm. I stumbled backward, slamming into the gas pump behind me, my breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. My double just stood there, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket, watching me with a quiet intensity. I told you I was waiting. I tried to force words from my throat, but they caught like barbed wire. My entire body was numb, my thoughts fracturing like shattered glass. How was this happening? The other me tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Then, with an eerie calm, he smiled. You should be grateful. You weren't supposed to make it this far. My hands clenched into fists, my nails biting into my palms. I was dreaming. I had to be. Sleep deprivation, hallucinations, something. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Then, he reached into his jacket. I braced myself, expecting a knife, a gun, something. But instead, he pulled out a car key. My car key. I instinctively patted my pocket, feeling nothing but the lining of my jeans. No, that wasn't possible. My stomach twisted into knots. I watched, paralyzed, as he lifted the key, unlocking the driver's side door with an audible beep. You've been running on fumes for hours, he said, opening the door and sliding into the driver's seat. My seat. The headlights flashed on, momentarily blinding me. I stumbled forward, panic taking full hold. Wait. The tires screeched against the pavement. I jumped back as my car peeled out of the parking lot, the taillights fading into the blackness of the empty road. I stood there, frozen in the cold night air, watching myself drive away. I had no car, no phone, no explanation, just an empty road ahead of me. The gas station attendant stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag, giving me a weird look. You good, man? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I turned to him, my mind still struggling to comprehend what had just happened. My car. I finally stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. Did you see that? The attendant raised an eyebrow. See what? I turned back toward the road. It was empty. No taillights. No sound of an engine in the distance. Just vast, stretching darkness. My car, I repeated, my voice hoarse. Someone just drove off in my car. The attendant frowned, rubbing the back of his head. Buddy, you pulled in here on foot. My blood ran cold. No, I had been driving. I knew I had been driving. I remembered every second of that highway, every mile, every cup of coffee I'd choked down just to stay awake. This wasn't possible. I shook my head violently, taking a shaky step back. No, I stopped here. My car was right there. I saw him. The attendant took a slow step toward me, concern flickering in his eyes. Look, man, I don't know what's going on, but you should probably sit down. I backed away. I'm fine. I wasn't. I turned in circles, scanning the lot, the streets, the gas pumps, anything. But there was nothing. No tire marks. No sign of my car ever having been there. And then, something cold crept up my spine. The gas station's security camera. My eyes snapped toward the small black dome mounted above the station doors. I stumbled toward it, my heart slamming against my ribs. Can I see the footage? I gasped. I just need to see the footage. The attendant hesitated. I I don't think we're supposed to. Please. My voice cracked. Just please. Something in my face must have convinced him, because he sighed and led me inside to the back office. He clicked through the footage, scrolling back to when I first arrived. I held my breath as he hit play. The screen showed the empty parking lot. Then me. But I wasn't pulling in. I was walking. Just me. Alone. No car. I watched, horrified, as the footage showed me stumbling into the station, my face pale, my body trembling, looking around wildly like I was lost. Like I had been walking for miles. Like I had never been driving at all. The attendant exhaled sharply. Dude, you okay? I took a step back, shaking my head. My vision blurred, my stomach churned. Outside, the road stretched into the night. Long, empty, endless, and somewhere out there, someone else was driving my car. And he had my face. Story 2. The road stretched endlessly before me, a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast Pennsylvania wilderness. It was past midnight, and I had been driving for hours, my only company the steady hum of the engine and the occasional static-filled voice from the radio. I had taken this route home before Clearfield County, an area surrounded by dense woods and scattered, forgotten towns. It was the fastest way back, even if it was eerily quiet at this hour. My GPS had been spotty for the last 20 miles, but I wasn't too worried. I knew the road well enough. Then the gas light blinked on. I cursed under my breath. My own fault for not filling up earlier. Pulling up the nearest station on my map, I found one about 5 minutes ahead. Just a small, nameless gas station, the only thing out here in the middle of nowhere. As I rolled into the lot, I noticed just one other vehicle, a rusted old pickup truck parked near the pumps. A man stood beside it, filling his tank. He was watching me as I pulled in, his gaze locked onto me in a way that made my skin prickle. I ignored him, stepping inside the station to grab a coffee while I paid for gas. The place was empty except for the cashier, an older man with thinning white hair and a tired expression. After paying, I walked back out to my car. The man at the truck was still watching me. I tried to act casual, unlocking my door as I glanced at him from the corner of my eye. His clothes were worn, jeans with dirt-stained knees, a thick flannel jacket. But what unsettled me was his expression, blank, unreadable. I got in my car quickly, locked the doors, and pulled away from the station. My heart was still pounding as I glanced at the rearview mirror. The man's truck hadn't moved. For a moment, I thought I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a weird local, curious about strangers passing through. But a mile down the road, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The truck was now behind me. I watched as it kept pace with me, never getting too close, but never falling back either. The headlights glowed like predatory eyes in my mirror. I pressed my foot against the gas pedal, picking up speed. The truck stayed with me. My hands gripped the wheel, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Why was he following me? And then, suddenly, the truck's headlights flickered. Not in a random way, it was deliberate. Like a signal. One flash. Then two. Then three. My pulse roared in my ears. I had no idea what it meant, but I didn't want to find out. Then my car shuddered violently. I knew that feeling. A flat tire. No, 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 I muttered, trying to keep control as my car wobbled. I had no choice. I had to pull over. I stopped on the shoulder, my breath ragged. The truck slowed too, rolling to a stop 100 feet behind me. He had been waiting for this. The moment my car stopped, the driver's side door of the truck creaked open. The man climbed out, moving slowly, deliberately. He wasn't holding a tire iron. He wasn't offering help. He had a knife. Panic surged through me. I scrambled for my phone, but of course, no service. I was completely alone. The man took another step toward me, the blade catching a sliver of moonlight. Then something happened that made my blood freeze. Another set of headlights flickered on. They weren't from my car, and they weren't from his truck. They were coming from the trees. A vehicle was inside the woods. My attacker stopped mid-step, his head snapping toward the glow filtering through the trees. His whole body tensed. A moment later, a second truck emerged from the dark, crawling onto the road like a predator slinking out of its den. The driver's window of the new truck rolled down. A voice, deep and rasping, called out, "What the hell are you doing?" My attacker hesitated. His grip on the knife tightened. Then, without another word, he turned and ran back to his truck, jumping inside and peeling off down the road. I barely had time to process what had happened before the second truck pulled up beside me. The driver leaned out the window. He was identical to the man who had just tried to attack me. Same face, same clothes, same dirt-streaked flannel. I was too stunned to speak. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "You weren't supposed to stop here." And before I could respond, before I could ask him what he meant, he drove away, leaving me alone with the broken night. The taillights of the second truck faded into the dark, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the road ahead. I sat there, frozen, hands clamped around the steering wheel, breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I wasn't supposed to stop here. The words echoed in my skull, hollow and cryptic, thick with something unspoken. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Two men, identical. One tried to kill me. The other saved me. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move. My tire was still flat, but sitting here on the side of the road, in the middle of nowhere, was no longer an option. I popped the trunk and climbed out into the cold. My breath hung in the air as I pulled out the spare tire, hands shaking as I fumbled for the jack. Every second I was out here, exposed, felt like an eternity. The road was silent. The woods, stretching like walls on either side, seemed impossibly dark. I worked quickly, my muscles tense, expecting at any moment to hear the rumble of an engine returning, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. But the world stayed eerily still. Finally, after what felt like hours, I tightened the last bolt and threw the damaged tire into the trunk. I climbed back inside, locking the doors before even daring to breathe again. My phone still had no signal. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Relief coursed through me, but it was short-lived. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I pulled back onto the road, the new tire holding steady beneath me. My only goal was to reach civilization. A town. A diner. Anywhere that wasn't this road. The drive stretched endlessly, every mile dragging slower than the last. The trees blurred past me, and yet it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Then, up ahead, I saw lights. A gas station. The same one I had just left. I slammed on the brakes. My heart hammered. No, that wasn't possible. I had been driving for at least 30 minutes straight, no turns, just one long stretch of road. But there it was. The exact same gas station. The old pickup truck was parked by the pumps. And standing beside it, waiting, was the man in the flannel. My stomach flipped. No, he drove away. I saw him leave. The cashier from before stepped out of the station, wiping his hands on a rag. He gave me the same concerned look as before, as if nothing had changed. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement. I spun the wheel, turning myself back the way I came. And then my headlights fell on something that turned my blood to ice. The second truck. The one that had saved me earlier. It was parked on the shoulder of the road, waiting. A figure stood beside it. And when I looked closer, I realized it was me. I gasped, my whole body locking up. It was me, standing there, wearing my jacket, my jeans, my expression frozen in the exact same horror I felt now. The other me lifted a hand and waved. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal and tore down the road, blowing past them, heart hammering, my breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. I didn't stop. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I drove as fast as my car could handle, my hands aching from how hard I was gripping the wheel. The road stretched ahead, endless and surreal. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the emptiness ahead. Then another set of headlights, approaching from the other direction. My stomach churned. The truck was coming, but I didn't know which one. The flannel man's truck? Or the one that had saved me? I had no idea what to do. I had no options. No exits, no turns, just the road and the growing distance between us. I kept driving. The truck kept coming. And then, right before it reached me, the headlights cut out. Everything went black. I don't remember stopping. I don't remember pulling over, or cutting the engine, or climbing out of the car. All I know is that I was standing in the middle of the road, staring into the abyss of the tree lane. The world felt wrong, twisted, like something had shifted, but I couldn't figure out what. And then, I heard footsteps, slow, crunching against the gravel, coming from the darkness ahead. A figure stepped into the dim glow of my taillights. I recognized him immediately. It was me, but not me. His clothes were dirty, stained with something dark. His face was pale, his lips cracked, his eyes sunken. He looked like he had been out here for days. And he was smiling. "You're not supposed to be here," he said softly. I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. "It's all right," he continued. "You're just lost." I swallowed thickly. My mouth was dry. Who are you?" His smile widened. "I'm you. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the sound of distant engines. More trucks. More headlights. Shapes moved between the trees, figures stepping forward, all of them familiar, all of them raw. Identical copies. Versions of me. I took a step back. This isn't real. This can't be real. The other me sighed, shaking his head. It is. But you won't remember. They never do. A low rumble echoed from behind me. I turned, my breath catching. A truck was pulling up. The door creaked open. The man in the flannel climbed out. He walked toward me slowly, his expression unreadable. The copies, the other versions of me, watched in eerie silence. And then the man in the flannel spoke. It's time to go. The headlights of the truck flared, blinding me. And then, nothing. I woke up in my bed. In my apartment. The clock read 9:47 a.m. For a long moment, I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, my mind blank. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? My phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Call me when you get home safe. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my keys, ran outside to the lot. My car wasn't there. I staggered back, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I turned in circles, heart racing, searching for some proof, something to tell me I was awake. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing by the trees, watching me. A man, wearing flannel. And when I looked directly at him, he smiled. Story 3. The snow had been falling in thick, heavy sheets for the last hour, coating the empty roads in a white, suffocating silence. My hands clenched the steering wheel tighter as my car struggled against the rising drifts. The headlights barely cut through the swirling flurries, making the road ahead feel like an endless void. I had been driving for nearly 5 hours, pushing through the worsening storm to reach Todd's house before the roads became completely impassable. He lived 3 states away, and we'd been taking turns visiting each other. But this time, the weather had made things complicated. The original plan was for me to leave early in the morning. Then, last minute, we decided it would be better if I left at night to get ahead of the worst of the blizzard. Now, I was regretting that decision. My fuel gauge was dropping fast, and the next town was still miles away. I needed to find shelter before I got stranded. That's when I saw it, a small diner, its neon, open sign flickering like a heartbeat in the darkness. Relieved, I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. The place looked old, the kind of roadside stop that probably hadn't changed in decades. A couple of trucks were parked near the entrance, their owners nowhere in sight. I stepped inside, immediately hit by the warmth of the heater and the smell of stale coffee. A waitress behind the counter gave me a tired smile, but my attention was pulled elsewhere. At the far end of the diner, a man sat at the bar, nursing a beer. His back was hunched, his shoulders broad under a thick, dark coat. His hands, wrapped around the glass, were large and rough. He wasn't eating, wasn't speaking to anyone. He was just watching me. I felt my stomach tighten. There was something about the way he sat, the way his presence seemed to pull at the air around him. I forced myself to ignore it and took a seat in a booth near the window. The waitress came over, her expression kind but distant. That night to be out driving, she said as she poured me a cup of coffee. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Yeah, I just need a place to wait it out for a bit. She hesitated. There's a motel a few miles up the road, she offered. Not the nicest place, but it's better than getting stuck in this weather. Before I could respond, the man at the bar turned in his seat. You don't want to go to that motel. His voice was deep, scratchy, like someone who had spent years smoking or shouting. I looked up at him, my heart thudding in my chest. The waitress gave him a sharp look. Don't start, Toby. The man, Toby, ignored her. His gaze was locked onto me, unblinking. Storm's gonna get worse. If you're smart, you'll stay right here. I swallowed hard. I appreciate the warning, but I really need to get moving. Toby exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Suit yourself. The waitress rolled her eyes and turned back toward the kitchen. I watched Toby for another second before looking away, a strange chill settling into my bones. I finished my coffee quickly, paid the bill, and stepped outside. The snow was even heavier now, thick and blinding. I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. As I made my way to my car, I noticed something odd, fresh footprints leading from the diner's door to my car. I frowned, looking around. The lot was empty except for my car and the 2 trucks. But the footprints, they didn't lead back. It was as if someone had walked to my car and never left. A shiver crawled up my spine. I reached for the door handle, hesitating. My reflection stared back at me in the window, pale and uncertain. Then movement. A shadow shifted in my back seat. I gasped, stumbling backward. My breath came out in sharp, panicked bursts. There was someone inside my car. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I could barely see through the frost-covered windows, but I knew someone was there. Then the driver's side door clicked open. Slowly, deliberately, a figure stepped out. It was Toby, but Toby was still inside the diner. My mouth went dry. The man standing in front of me was identical to the man I had just seen at the bar, same coat, same rough hands, same unreadable expression. But he wasn't moving. He just stood there, silent, watching. I took a step back. My head was spinning, my body screaming at me to run. Then he spoke. "I told you not to go to the motel." My stomach twisted. His lips didn't move. The words weren't spoken aloud. They were inside my head. The words echoed inside my skull like they had been planted there, foreign and unnatural. My breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, fogging up the frigid air around me. The man, Toby, or something that looked like him, stood completely still. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't blinking. He was just waiting. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to do something. I turned sharply, my boots crunching in the deepening snow as I sprinted back toward the diner. The wind howled, stinging my skin as I nearly slipped trying to reach the door. I slammed inside, gasping for breath, my pulse roaring in my ears. Toby, the real Toby, was still sitting at the bar. He hadn't moved. He turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. "Told you." I whirled toward the waitress. My voice faltered. How the hell do I even explain this? "Someone's in my car." Her face changed instantly. She set the coffee pot down, stepping toward me. "Who?" I turned to look out the window. My car was still sitting there, covered in frost, untouched. No footprints in the snow. No one standing beside it. Nothing. My chest rose and fell with panicked, uneven breaths. Did I imagine it? The waitress followed my gaze, then sighed. "You're just rattled. Happens to a lot of people traveling through here in bad weather. You're overtired." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was a mess of static, and no matter how much I tried to rationalize, I knew what I saw. The waitress's voice softened. "Listen, just stay here for a bit. We close in an hour, but you can wait out the storm before heading to the motel." I was about to agree when Toby muttered something under his breath. I barely caught it. "You won't make it to the motel." I turned sharply. "What?" He didn't answer. He just stood up from the bar, grabbed his coat, and walked out into the storm. The door swung shut behind him with a dull thud. The waitress sighed, shaking her head. "Ignore him. Toby's always been a little off." I licked my lips, still staring at the door. Something about his words sat wrong. I needed to leave. I hurried back outside, my boots crunching in the snow. The wind had gotten worse, so bad that the entire parking lot looked untouched, as if no one had ever been there at all. I scanned the lot, my breath catching in my throat. Toby's truck was gone, but I never heard an engine start. Never saw taillights disappear into the storm. Just gone. I forced myself to my car, gripping the ice-cold handle. The inside was freezing, but nothing was out of place. My backseat was empty. The doors had been locked. It was like nothing had happened, but I knew better. I shoved the key into the ignition and peeled out of the lot, my tires struggling for grip on the slick road. I didn't care. I just wanted to get away. The snow swallowed the world in every direction, my headlights barely illuminating anything ahead of me. I had my GPS running, but the signal was weak. The road stretched on endlessly, flanked by towering pines that looked like silent watchers in the night. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I should have reached the motel by now. I checked my GPS again. The screen flickered, struggling against the poor signal. But the map was still running, showing my route in real time. And that's when I noticed it. I had been driving in a straight line. No turns. No deviations. But the distance to the motel wasn't changing. It still said 15 minutes. My stomach turned. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to stay calm. The road was bad. Maybe I had slowed down more than I thought. But another 10 minutes passed. Still 15 minutes away. I checked my phone. No signal. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. My breath left me. There were headlights behind me, but not one set. 2, 3, more. They stretched back into the darkness, a long, unbroken line of approaching vehicles. They were all identical. Old pickup trucks. Every single one. I felt my pulse slam against my ribs, a deep, primal terror settling into my bones. Then my GPS spoke. But it wasn't the normal robotic voice. It was a man's voice. Deep. Scratched. Familiar. "You weren't supposed to leave." My entire body went rigid. I slammed the GPS off, my hands tightening on the wheel. The headlights behind me grew closer. I pressed the gas pedal. Hard. The car roared forward, tires skidding against the snow-packed road. I didn't care. I wasn't going to stop. The trucks behind me sped up too. They were closing in. I turned sharply at the next intersection, a road that wasn't even on my GPS. I didn't care where it led. I just needed to get away. The trucks followed. But one of them pulled ahead. Cut me off. I had no choice. I hit the brakes, my car fishtailing wildly before stopping just inches from the first truck's bumper. The other truck slowed too, forming a wall around me. My stomach clenched. A door creaked open. Someone stepped out. The wind howled, carrying thick sheets of snow across the road. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his shape. Big, unmoving, waiting. Then another door opened. Then another. One by one, the drivers stepped out. Every single one of them looked like Toby. My head swam. My breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. The first Toby stepped forward. His face was shrouded in shadow, but I could hear his voice as clearly as if he was inside my car. This road doesn't lead anywhere. A pause. Neither do you. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning wildly against the slick road. The vehicle jerked backward, and I whipped the wheel to the side. I didn't care if I crashed. I just needed to move. Then the road disappeared. I blinked. The trucks. The men. The snow. Gone. I was alone. The storm had vanished, leaving only an empty stretch of road beneath a clear, moonlit sky. My hands were still trembling as I slowly turned the wheel, my breath shaking as I looked around. I checked my GPS. My motel was 5 minutes away. I drove the rest of the way in silence, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. When I reached the motel, I parked quickly and stumbled inside. The clerk barely glanced at me, sliding a room key across the counter. I hurried down the hall, unlocking the door and shoving it shut behind me. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just crawled into bed, my whole body shaking. I closed my eyes. But just as I started to drift off, someone knocked on the motel room door. Soft, slow, 3 times. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding my breath, waiting. The knocks came again. And then, a voice. Low, deep, familiar. I told you not to come here.